often one or two additional designers who this focuses more on doing some of the heavy lifting and content creation, level building, that sort of stuff. So I guess there's less need for as formal a process as that. It's fair to say that we invite design input from the whole team, and that tends to happen fairly naturally. Like we don't have, early on there'll be brainstorming meetings where people kind of are actively invited to contribute. And they contribute to varying degrees. Some people are very interested in getting involved in that. Other people are less inclined to want to have their say into that. And our attitude to that generally is that designers don't always have the best idea on a subject, and nor should they have to. It's often the case that somebody who's working on something very specific, a small part of the game, can see a much better way of doing it, just by nature of the fact they're actually looking at this thing all day, every day. And most of the time, I think someone will kind of come to the lead designer, will come to me and say, hey, what about if we did it this way? And normally it's like, well, yeah, that's better, let's do that. Because the designers are looking at every part of the game, but not necessarily digging into the same level of details as the person who's implementing it. But then there are times that I think the lead designer specifically needs to be empowered to be able to say, yeah, I can see that makes perfect sense for this bit here, but to do it that way introduces all these inconsistencies with this other stuff. So it really does need to be what seems like a slightly more difficult or convoluted way to make it all fit together as a whole. So there really does, in our system at least, and I'm not saying that we've got it perfectly figured out or anything, there needs to be somebody who can say, cut it, or this fits, this doesn't fit. And they're very, there's no ego about it, they're very receptive to that input from everyone else. And we really don't, designers don't get to have egos. You get that slapped out of you pretty soon.
Yeah.
But it's important that there is somebody who has the team's respect, has the vision of the game as a whole, who can actually see whether these pieces do. It needs to ensure that people are building components in the best way they can, but also that these things all fit together to make the same whole at the end of the day.
Yeah. We have a GDD, a traditional sense, but we don't. One thing I've noticed is no one reads a GDD, right? So, especially if it's any more than like 4 pages, no one reads anything, or at least they might read it, but they don't retain it. So, what I like to do is I grab the GDD and we sit down with the designers and especially the leads on the project, and we just say, okay, we call it the 30,000-foot view layout, and we say, well, what is this game about from way back here? Because depending on who you are on the team and what your tasks are and what you're being asked to perform, you want varying degrees of information, and we just kind of whittle down from there. And we create what we call our strike teams. So basically we go, okay, this is about combat, and these are all the people who are going to be working on combat in one form or another, whether they're artists, whether they're designers, whether they're animators, whatever, programmers. And we start whittling down the information into very specific details. And that gets all the way down to how we create the task list for the team. So it's not maybe not as organic as Dave's system, or maybe not even as structured as what they do at Pandemic. But one thing I believe is that you got to tailor the information for the specific team even, and you could whittle that down to the specific person. And to Dave's point, someone at the end of the day though, the director, project director, basically has to be the keeper of the vision, making sure that if something does slide off in a left field, it can be pulled back in very quickly. But we find it's a way of getting everybody the general information. The entire team knows the vision for the game, and it's broken down into a couple sentences. And then individuals on the team, depending on what their tasks are and what they're doing, what they provide to the project, have more focused information, and it kind of bleeds all the way down from there.
In terms of documentation, we've never done it the same way twice. I think every project is different. We've tried sometimes we've used a wiki, sometimes we've used a document, sometimes we've used something similar to a bug tracking system where you sort of have user stories that are owned by individuals, have dates and priorities attached to them. So we keep every project sort of look at what worked, what didn't, what can we do differently. And we haven't yet hit the point where we feel like we've got it sussed. And I don't know if anyone has really.
I don't think there is. That's what I was saying. It's like, be flexible, because every team's different. They're going to react different.
Well, which begs the question, I'll say a few of those. Working with RP and going back to what they were saying about publishers, very often we find we have conflicting objectives and goals of publishers. So my question to you from a designer's point of view is, how do you balance that relationship between the publisher and maintain the vision of your game?
Wow. That's one of the hardest things to do, I think, in the long run. And again, I'll go back to I was saying earlier about establishing a vision early, getting people involved early, including the publisher, knowing who the critical people are to get involved, identifying the key players, to be honest with you. And it may sound a little bit political, but as designers, if you think your job doesn't include knowing how to be diplomatic and negotiate, then you're in the wrong discipline. So for us, it always boils down to the beginning about having that vision, having the vision keeper, having the team sold on it, getting the licensor involved. I mean, we've a lot of times, some marketing or PR person at publishing will come in and say, oh, well, I think you guys should strip all that stuff out, and this is what people want. And it's amazing how sometimes I'll just go, you should talk to the license holder about that. And I kind of deflect that over. And the people who, they have to please the license holder because it's a relationship they have, a business relationship, and that person says, yeah, that's exactly what the Space Marine holds in his left hand 23 hours out of the day, and it just gets, taken care of. So being diplomatic, knowing how, how to steer those conversations, but it all boils down to being very clear on what you're trying to accomplish up front and selling everybody on the vision for the product up front. But it's always going to happen. I mean, I've never been in a development cycle where you didn't arm wrestle a little bit with the publisher.
I was the marketing manager for Virgin. I used to pay for a brilliant time.
And I'm not directing this at marketing or PR. Very lovely people.
It actually begs the question, and I'll ask this of David, is design both a creative skill and a technical skill that if you're required to understand and interact with and communicate with all these parties and all of whom have very different visions?
Absolutely it is. I mean, technically people, I guess, who aren't involved in it would assume that creativity is the largest part of it. And it's certainly really important. Like a designer has to be able to bring some creativity and some creative passion to what they're doing. But really more of what you do is problem solving, is sitting in a room with people who are very, very clever and trying to convince them to do something they don't want to do. There's certainly some negotiation ability required, even within your project team, let alone once you start to get on the phone with people who have their own vision of what you ought to be doing. And perhaps not the same level of understanding of what the consequences of what it are. So you sort of need to find ways to, without ever digging your toes in or refusing, you certainly can't afford to be a prima donna about it, but there can be things where you need to sort of help them kind of come to the right sort of conclusion that you may be trying to steer them towards. So there are a few different ways to do that. I think that a strategy that I use a lot is when somebody's suggesting something, oftentimes, and it's not always the case, but sometimes something we suggest that it's going to be a heck of a lot of work and it's going to give you a great deal of benefit. You get to cut some other things that are much more valuable to get in, or something that you feel might actually just make the game worse. And at that point, I think the best thing to do is to dig down into what the underlying problem is that's made them suggest that. So oftentimes when you're getting this kind of feedback from a publisher or a license holder, even from people within the company, they're pointing at a problem, and you need to listen to that because there will be something underlying that you need, something's not there that it ought to be, or something's more complicated than it should be. And the solution they propose might be really problematic, but you can often find a way to fix that underlying problem by listening to that and sort of dodge doing the really clumsy solution that you wanted to avoid in the first place. But I mean, the technical skill is a big part of it as well. I think design runs the risk of everyone in the company feels like they can do it. Same way everyone feels like they can write. You listen to somebody sing or watch somebody paint, it's like, I could never do that. That's amazing. But we all write notes to ourselves, often misspelled and with bad grammar and so on. But we all feel like we can get that. Similarly with design, everyone kind of knows. They know when it stinks. I can't really tell particularly well whether someone's code is great or not, unless it's obviously buggy. Whereas with design, I think people all feel they have some input into that. And so it's tough for a designer sometimes, particularly early on in their career, to get to the point where those they're working with, respect that technical ability, that experience, that ability to make a call that, this system is broken in some way. We need to make this change to fix it, to create a better reward mechanism, a better feedback loop there for the player. And there's a lot of that isn't taught anywhere particularly well, at the moment, as far as I'm aware. A lot of that does just have to be learned through making mistakes, normally a couple of times, and suffering the consequences of them, and thickening your skin and getting used to making those kind of decisions in the field. Sorry, Trent.
Just to dive off to the side there, following the whole thing of ensuring you have the respect for the team, being someone new. If you have designers you know, junior designers and everything who you're trying to